Next on Startup Spokane, we're going to be visiting with Susan Ashe, Executive Director of Health Sciences and Services Authority. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I did my best.
Great.
Damn it.
Great performance.
All right, hold on a sec. The thing is, the internet was streamed.
Next on Startup Spokane, we'll be visiting with Susan Ashe, Executive Director of the Health Sciences and Services Authority. Join us for this great discussion.
Welcome to Startup Spokane, where hosts Steve Traben and Megan Halsey explore the excitement and momentum growing throughout Spokane's expanding startup community. Startup Spokane is a joint effort between Greater Spokane Incorporated's Startup Spokane, our friends at Well Dressed Walrus, and Spokane Talks Online. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Megan.
Welcome to Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Online, your podcast home for everything startup and entrepreneurship related in the Spokane region. I'm your host, Steve Traben, along with me, Megan Halsey. And as you know, Startup Spokane is a program of Greater Spokane Incorporated, and we're here to provide you with our region's story on entrepreneurship, as well as to educate you about the resources that exist in our region's ecosystem. We want to share ways for you to plug in and connect to the resources you need so that you can successfully launch and grow your business. Megan, let's get this dialogue going with Susan Ashe. How about introducing our guest?
In the Inland Northwest, we're really fortunate to have a vibrant and diverse ecosystem that includes a wide range of different resources and encourages the development of new businesses in a number of industries and disciplines. Sometimes we develop special resources that go around funding or assisting those businesses as they get started. And today we're talking to one of those, the Executive Director of the Health Science and Services Authority of Spokane County, known as the HSSA, and their Executive Director is Susan Ashe. Susan, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Megan, thanks. And thanks to both of you for inviting HSSA to be present today. We really do appreciate that. Well, I'm Susan Ashe, and I'm the Executive Director of the Health Sciences and Services Authority of Spokane County. I have a 9-person board of some tremendous people from our community and myself, and that is the organization.
Yep.
I also link with other organizations. I serve on the board of the Statewide Life Science Washington. I'm working with the Executive Advisory Group of the GSI's Vision 2030. I'm on the board and past chair of the YWCA of Spokane and on the board of the Spokane Public Schools Foundation.
You're a busy, busy lady.
Very connected as well.
Yeah, so let's get our listeners grounded on what HSSA is and its mission. So spend a couple of minutes talking about that, Susan.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to do that. HSSA was created in 2007 by the Washington State Legislature. The interesting thing is it really was an idea that was born in Spokane, and it was sponsored by some of the usual wonderful organizations in our community like Steve's Avista and like Providence and Washington State University, etc. And the idea was to bring resources to Spokane to fund biosciences and health research and infrastructure in our community. And the purpose really is economic development. I mean, that is why we exist.
Yeah. So that's great. Where does the HSSA get that funding that it does to do its mission?
Sure. Good question. So far, our stream of funding is all public. In the legislation, we receive 0.02% of countywide sales tax. So while the state created us, the county approved us or authorized us countywide. So all money is spent in Spokane County that comes through us. And that's not a lot of money. It's maybe $1.7 million a year. It's a tiny percent of total county sales tax. But we did in 2010 go out, our board, and determined that we ought to try to bond our funding stream for research. And we did that through Spokane County at very favorable rates. We were able to raise, some significant funds so that we had money up front to spend for this mission.
Fantastic. So Does it require reauthorization every year?
Good point. Yes, we were authorized for 15 years, and that
Wow.
first authorization ends at the end of 2022. So like you probably would imagine, we're busy working with our legislators to reauthorize HSSAs in Washington State.
Now, as I recall, there's some specific areas that you grant funds in. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are and how they differ?
Sure. We joined hands with Empire Health Foundation when it first came on board after the sale of the Empire Health Organization, and held public strategic planning sessions. And from that, we determined what our funding strategies at the time would be. Now, those can evolve, and our board meets regularly, and just recently did, and I'll talk about that a little later. But we generally fund capital for human resources and infrastructure. That's one category of research that we fund. So in that area, we have funded several researchers, largely to the WSU Spokane operation, to the College of Pharmacy and Medicine. And we have another category that's based on companies who have already received federal small business grants, SBIR and STTR grants. And we will match up to $500,000 for companies who have those grants. And so
Great.
You might imagine that isn't as popular as some of the other grant areas that we have, only because we really did start out with embryonic research in our community, and we're growing that. And it's been very successful.
So, but the spectrum is really any life, health, bioscience?
Yes, correct.
That's the spectrum of it?
Absolutely.
And do you have to be affiliated with the university in order to receive the funding, or
No.
It can be private?
Yes.
Private entrepreneur with
Yes.
an idea, right?
So the capital, the human capital category I spoke of first really is university related.
Okay,
we're bringing
they're
in
researchers.
We built out the core laboratories
Okay.
because you must be able to retain your researchers. You have to be able to attract them by recruiting them, and then you have
Right.
to be able to retain them, and they need very expensive equipment.
So let's talk more about the non-human capital side. What are those categories? And because I want to make sure our listeners see this as a funding source,
Sure.
and they want to,
It
they're
is.
probably thinking, okay, does my idea or my business does it fit into the criteria that you'd be looking for?
So the criteria we're looking for is, first, you have to have an SBIR, STTR, or other federal grant, like a DOD that's in the health arena, or an NSF, or something like that.
Sure.
Kind of grant. And then we'll match that, as I said, up to $500,000. You must locate your business in Spokane County. Of course, we need a proposal first and foremost so our board can make a decision about that. And our proposals are easily available online at our website. So you can do your application online now. We've evolved that so it'll be more friendly, user-friendly. Let's see, what was your...
Well, I think you're answering the question, but you've said that a prerequisite is a SBIR or STTR funding.
Or some other federal
And
program.
I'm not sure that, again, our listeners many of them aren't going to know what that is or what those are and how you go about.
Actually, I'd like to actually redirect this a little bit, because the Gateway grant is the one that we've used a lot with some of our startup clients. We've actually referred quite a number over to Susan, and that is the grant writing grant. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we realize that it's pretty hard if if you've never written a grant, which in our community you would understand that might be the case in our region. These are very sophisticated proposals one must make to a federal agency.
Yeah.
And so we set up a category that would grant up to $5,000 for consulting to help you write a grant to receive your first grant, to receive one of these kinds of federal grants. And those typically can go from anywhere from, $150,000 to $200,000 to $1 million. These are large grants that you're trying to get for your idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so this grant writing grant up to $5,000 is really the first step,
Yes.
which then gives you the knowledge and hopefully the guidance to write an SBIR, STTR grant.
Or other
other.
DOD or whatever, as long
Okay.
as it's a health science type grant.
So that's great. I'm glad we took it all the way back to the beginning because I
Exactly.
missed that part.
So
Yes.
that's kind of the very first, that's where I usually get my clients introduced to the HSSA, because most of them are really fledgling. They're just getting started, and everything is new.
And everyone needs money and funding. I mean, so
then
we
can we-
recognized that, and the board decided that we'd set up a small firm.
Oh, that's wonderful.
To help them.
And
on
then do you
their
actually
way.
put them through did you have a workshop for that?
What we've done is contracted with three exceptional consultants around the country who all have NIH or otherwise experience in these kinds of grant writing. And so we recommend that they use one of those three, and they interview those three and pick the one they want to use. And then that company actually bills us for the time and services to the startup.
What a great resource, though, because that can be just a mind-boggling process. The paperwork
It is.
so
Well, just
voluminous.
finding where in that enormous federal budget your little grant might sit. What's funding it? What agency? What's
So do they even help you
subcategory?
identify a grant?
Oh, yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
wow.
So
That's
it's all
really
about
great.
navigating that
Navigating the
federal
system.
funding system, right? And SBIR and STTR, we've got a couple minutes before we go to break. Can you talk a little bit about what they are and what that looks like?
Yeah, those are fun. It comes from a federal pool of money that is determined by the budget process and the economic development organization in the government. And virtually every federal agency has their small pot of SBIR, STTR grant money.
Okay.
So which is why we are strong supporters of continuing to fund SBIR, STTR funding,
Right.
along with NIH funding for research. You'll see that on the GSI's federal agenda when they go to D.C. here in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, we're having a great conversation with Susan Ashe, Executive Director of the HSSA here in Spokane County. We're going to take a short break on Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Online. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
They say it takes a community to raise a family. It also takes one to build a business. I came to Spokane 12 years ago as a Whitworth student, and I planned to leave after graduation. But the more I got to know this community, the more I wanted to become a part of it. My husband and I have built our business in Spokane, and now we're raising our family here too. We operate a consulting company that provides creative business development strategies. Our approach is holistic and dependent on intentional connections and relationships. And no one understands connections and relationships better than GSI. They direct momentum towards investments in our community, provide resources that help business leaders connect, and they're dedicated and passionate about making Spokane great. GSI gives me the confidence to build my business here because they believe every organization, even a small one like mine, adds big value to our community. With GSI's help, Spokane will be a place my son will want to build his career too. I'm Eva Marquette, owner of Freshview. We're creating something greater with Greater Spokane Incorporated.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.
Welcome back to Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Online. We are talking to Susan Ashe, Executive Director of the HSSA. And Susan, one of the things that we were talking about over the break is, you've been actually doing this work since about 2009. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the outcomes and some of the results you guys have seen as a result of your work?
Well, you remember, thank you. That's a great question, and I appreciate it on behalf of my board and those that we serve.
Yeah.
Yes, we've started operating in 2009. After about a year of the state and the county figuring out how this brand new type of organization would operate. And since that time, I'm happy to say that we have been able to raise about $70 million of direct and indirect economic activity in our county, about 445 jobs. These are really good paying jobs. They're researchers and lab specialists and et cetera, research associates, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And we have also count in economic development economics the kind of resource that we're able to bring into town, like extramural funding, we call it. And we've been able to bring about $20 million worth of extramural funding into the community.
And this is on top of
Yes.
about $5 million of grant funds that
Yes.
you've actually distributed to.
Yes, it's $5 million of grant funds, and so then we've run the economics, and this is what it turns out to be. So for a little bit of money, you could have here
Great, big impact.
a big
impact.
impact, and I think that's a point that's important for people to
Yeah,
understand.
and the creation of high-wage jobs,
Yes,
right? I mean,
absolutely.
we talk often on this program about the number of students that are graduating from our area colleges and
Yes.
universities that export out for lack of high-paying jobs,
yeah.
and these businesses, which I know Megan wants to get into next, some of these success stories
Sure.
are employing some of these.
Right.
Some of this
Yeah,
talent.
and I think that's exactly what we want to kind of talk about is if you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the companies who've had some success working with you by getting these grants and how it's moved their research forward.
Sure. Well, there are two companies I think of in particular. One is Novion Technologies, and the other is ISIS Molecular Sciences, and they have been the recipients of 2 or 3 grants now from us in various levels. And they're very interested in the issue of infectious disease, and they've created a series of compounds, some of which have not been done before, right here in Spokane, with the kind of talent they have, and the laboratory space that they have, and the equipment. And I can't speak to what those are. Some of them are not something they're willing to talk about quite yet. But if you realize that in the health provider side of the business, of the world that we're in, that infectious disease, they call them HAIs, are about a $50 billion problem a year in the United States alone. So if you can figure out ways to take care of MRSA and other kinds of infectious diseases, that's important worldwide. And we're doing that kind of research right here in Spokane with those 2 companies. They've also gone into a line of treatments for burn wounds, because some of their funding came from the DoD that we matched. And so wound applications for faster healing and that sort of thing. And that's another area that has multiple applications, but certainly the military.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really love about the HSA's programs is that by giving that extra up to $500,000, you're just extending that runway. The turn time on making a health-focused company profitable is really long, and so every dollar makes a huge difference. So
Yeah, especially when
thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because the runway for a traditional startup that's not health-based, I mean, is
2
much
to 3
2 to
years,
3
but
years.
sure.
So this is a much longer
By
runway.
the time they get approval to profitability,
Oh, yeah.
And does
Absolutely.
HSSA, is it a one-time grant funding, or can companies come back?
Companies may come back if they have a new federal grant to match.
Okay, so it's always based on matching
Matching funds.
a new grant.
Likewise, in our human capital, the university who brings a proposal to us for a new researcher not only has to match that funding, but that researcher must bring a portion of all of his current grant
Yeah.
funding with him or her.
Yeah.
And that's important too, because that leads
absolutely.
to the extramural funding coming into our community where it's spent.
All right. Susan, let's take a minute and talk about, I call it the pipeline. The pipeline of ideas and researchers coming to HSSA for funding. I have to think, and I'd love for you to expand on this, that with our robust medical district, with our and healthcare services here in Spokane, with Providence and others, with Washington State University having a medical school, University of Washington, talk about, is that where the logical pipeline exists for HSSA to see new ideas and research? Where's it coming from?
I think that's right, largely. No question about it. It's bioscience, it's health sciences, it's life sciences. So if someone had, for instance, an idea that maybe was more life sciences, and maybe it was agra and food, or agra and animal that leads to a human health solution, we'd probably be interested in that too. But right now, it's what we have. And it's coming out of the research labs here, both in the private and the public sector.
Okay, yeah, I would think so. And what about HSSA, because you're funding companies that have to be in Spokane County,
Right.
is it also a recruitment tool? I mean, are we actually recruiting researchers and new startup ideas into our county? Do you have any experience with, you see what I'm saying, luring them to Spokane to do
Well-
this because of your funding?
Well, I have something here that I can show you if you want to hand me that. I think HSSA does its own. It says we want to fund your research in Spokane County.
Right.
And so every convention or conference I'm at, this kind of literature is there. But that's very much a single entity, maybe along with GSI, with whom we partner on
Sure.
this,
Yeah.
trying to raise attention to our area. I think right now is a great opportunity because of Vision 2030, because of what you folks at Startup Spokane are doing in your runway projections that we saw the other evening at an event, with the work that, of course, Visit Spokane has done. There's just a number, some good economic development recruitment work the mayor's working on. There's a number of areas that are going to coalesce somewhere and collaborate. And collaboration in Spokane County is really what we're about.
Yeah.
This is what a newcomer can get from us. We're going to help that company succeed.
Yeah, and I think, this is an element of our ecosystem, our sandbox, that we really haven't, over the last 3 years, really exposed. And so this dialogue today with you, Susan, and with HSSA is really important because it's another level of funding that is outside of what I call traditional
Correct.
funding.
Because this is grant funding. We're not investing in your company and expect something back from your company. Now,
Right.
that doesn't mean that we couldn't raise private funds, because we are allowed to do that under our legislative authority. And then we could be more like a VC and invest in those funds. We just have not chosen to do that to date. And maybe that's a question for later on when we really see a lot of activity, more than we see today.
Well, it's nice to know that there's a future and that you guys are looking forward as
absolutely.
to what's coming next. But so I want to talk a little bit about some of the littler companies that you guys have helped. And I guess this is really bragging rights for us too, because a lot of these are companies that we have partnered to send your way. But if you want to share some of the companies who have recently acquired some of those grant writing grants.
Sure.
We'd love to talk
I'd
about
love to do that. I have to use a resource, though, to help me, because there's 10 of them to date.
That's fine.
And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
The good news is that our board recently met for a board retreat, and we have refunded this particular opportunity from $50,000 to $100,000. So that's going to be that many more $5,000 grants
that's
to be
great.
helpful for new companies, because we do see an uptick in the need there.
Yeah.
And we'll also be helping academic researchers who
So how many of
align
these,
themselves with a private company too.
Susan, how many of these $5,000 grant-making grants have you actually made?
10.
10 so far. Okay.
50,000 was our first
Okay.
investment.
Okay, got it. Okay.
5,000 each.
And so now you've doubled
moving
up.
up to
100,000.
100,000 because it's been so successful.
That's fantastic.
Now
And
they're in the process, in the works, because this is sort of a new effort of ours in the last half dozen months or so.
Right.
But gosh, they've been popular, and we do thank Startup Spokane for sending people our way in this arena of health and biosciences. Lots of great ideas out there. We are not lacking in ideas in Spokane.
Good. And are there some specific examples that you might want to share of just a couple of them?
Sure. Meet a Priority is a company that's developing some how to aggregate disparate medical records among users. So it's a software venture.
That's great.
Monte Carlo Medical Technologies you sent to
Yeah.
us. That's Diego Vidal, the CEO, and Paula Eboli, who's Dr. Eboli. And they're doing R&D to design endovascular devices with fluoroless technology. Now, this means a whole new world of imaging, if you can imagine that, and no exposure to X-ray.
Yeah.
So if they were to be successful, wow, wouldn't that be great in our community? And then Glucose Revival is a company that we're trying to help, and they've done a lot of research on insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring, and in non-invasive ways. And interestingly enough, I just heard this morning that this was a big issue at the HIMSS conference in Las Vegas last week. According to Marcelo, Dr. Anyway, so that's a great one to have.
And maybe just for a minute, if we can, I want to just create some alignment and connect some dots with a company like Glucose Revival. We're actually working with them through a program we have called Mind to Market, which is helping them hopefully very quickly get to commercialization. So this is where we're cross-pollinating and bringing various resources together to the end of hopefully getting them to launch what I think is a pretty phenomenal product to address people with hypoglycemia, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it will have other applications in the future, too.
Yeah, and one of the ones I thought that was interesting on that list is Tidy Hut. And
You wouldn't normally consider that something
and that's what I
HSSA
want you to talk about.
would
is
fund.
exactly
would you?
that.
Yes. Well, we did fund them. They're looking at a new technology for portable toilets that are clean and sterile. Wouldn't that be a welcome thing, particularly
Yes.
for women who go to sporting events and such? Oops, sorry.
And what's the rationale for funding them? Why is that considered
There's
under the HSSA?
there's definitely a health implication there.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, it is really broad in terms
It can
of
be, yeah.
what fits in the box, if you will, for HSSA.
We're like you. We want to make sure that they have their ducks in a row and they're thinking about their business plan and their marketing strategy and those sorts of
Yeah.
things as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
That's important. We don't have money just to throw away.
Absolutely.
Right, but we also don't want people to think that they have to be coming up with some new drug treatment or
Right.
device. I mean, healthcare is very broad, and it sounds like HSSA is really embracing kind of the bookends of it and allowing
Yeah.
people to fit within those.
And healthcare's technology too. A lot of times, I think
IT
we're going
is
to
going to
see
become
more
more
and
and
more
more
of it.
important.
Yeah.
IT is.
So I'm really excited to
Yeah.
see some of those funnel your way.
So my prediction is that over time, our ecosystem is going to become more robust.
Yes.
The momentum, we already feel the momentum really kicking into high gear.
I agree.
2022 is when this first round sunsets. What's the crystal ball look like for the next round of funding for HSSA?
What's going to be the next McCleary that causes decision that causes the legislature to focus need to focus most of its attention on those sorts of big issues. They have big issues. This is not a big issue. This is, pretty known. The success is known. It can be even better with more funding, but right now we're just worrying about reauthorization for the next 15 years.
And that's at the state level?
It is funding at the state level. It's deferred, a teeny percent of deferred sales tax, state
Right.
sales tax,
Yeah.
that flows through the county.
Right, okay, but you have to basically get that written into the budget at the state level. It's not lobbying at the county level, it's lobbying at the
No,
state
but it
level.
is for the commissioners who are greatly supportive of us.
Right.
I want to say and thank them very much for that, and the mayor and our legislators, very supportive of us, and companies like yours, Steve, who are helping us lobby the
Yeah.
legislature,
Right.
or to educate people in the legislature to understand what a good thing this is
Well,
for,
and
for an area like ours,
Oh,
especially.
absolutely.
I have to think you've got an incredible story to tell. You have just amazing outcomes.
Yes.
Susan, if people are interested in learning more about the grant-making grant or other funding that comes from the HSSA, what's the best way for them to connect with you and the organization?
Probably the first best way is for them to go to our website at www.hssaspokane.org. And they can read all about the grants there. That's where you apply. You'll see some success stories, those sorts of things. And communications generally about what's going on in the ecosystem. When we know it, we like to share that information too, as you do.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, and of course, anybody's welcome to come to Startup Spokane, and we will also make that referral as well because we can make those connections.
You can call us at the office, of course, at 509
Go ahead.
Yeah,
474-0798, and that's our office phone number, or Susan at hssaspokane.org.
Great. Yeah, so good resources. And unfortunately, I think we have to wrap it up because I think we're out of time for today. But I want to thank you, Susan, for joining us
Thanks for
on
having us. We
Startup
appreciate it.
Spokane Radio, on
Yeah,
Spokane Talks
absolutely.
Online. And thanks for letting us share the story of entrepreneurship in the Inland Northwest. And we hope that you're going to join us for future broad and podcasts. And we'll continue to bring you profiles of successful entrepreneurs, information about helpful resources, and so much more. So talk to you next time on Startup Spokane on Spokane Talks Online.
Startup Spokane is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is a joint effort between GSI's Startup Spokane, Well Dressed Walrus, and Spokane Talks Online. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com. We wish you a great and profitable day.